Welcome everyone to the Cucina Aurora Kitchen Witchery podcast. I have another amazing episode for you today of Conversational Witchcraft with the incredible Lilith Dorsey. Lilith hails from the many magical I'm going to start over, and perhaps Corey, the producer, can edit that out because I haven't finished my coffee yet today. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, here we go. We are back on another episode of Conversational Witchcraft with the amazing Lilith Dorsey. Lilith hails from many magical traditions, including Afro-Caribbean, Celtic, and Indigenous American spirituality. Their traditional education focuses on plant science, anthropology, and film at the University of Rhode Island, New York University, and the University of London. And their magical training includes numerous initiations in Santeria, also known as Lucumi. I was going to mispronounce
Lucumi.
That one. Lucumi. Haitian. I'm going to skip that. She's amazing. Lilith Dorsey is also a Buddhist priestess, and in that capacity has been doing successful magic since 1991 for patrons, is editor, publisher of Oshun-African Magickal Quarterly, a filmmaker of the experimental documentary Bodies of Water, Voodoo Identity and Tranceformation, a choreographer, performer for jazz legend Dr. John's Night Tripper Voodoo Show. They have long been committed to providing accurate and respectful information about the African traditional religions and are proud to be a published Black author of such titles as 55 Ways to Connect to Goddess, the African-American Ritual Cookbook, which you know we're going to talk about, Love Magic, Orishas, Goddesses, and Voodoo Queens, Water Magic, and the newly re-released Voodoo and African Traditional Religion. Lilith, what a resume. I mean, come on. You're amazing. I mean,
thank you.
To talk about your work and like what you do and how you're such a full career in everything that you do. And I feel like you touch so many different traditions and blend them in your own way. And it's just amazing. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on. I feel like I should have added Sicilian and Strega to that, because we were talking about different things and how it was different. I was like, but I grew up with part of my Sicilian family in Bay Ridge. So I feel like literally my roots are like,
So we're the same. We're the same. See, this is, and for those of you just listening and not watching, I'm pointing to my nose, my schnozola. My schnozola, as I put it. This is my Sicilian right here. I get the little Sicilian hump in my
Oh yeah, you do.
Right? I do. It's not that pronounced, but I turn to the side and in the profile, you can see it. So we were saying before we started recording, like we've met like a bunch of times, but like never actually had a conversation. Right? Like we've met in New York City back when, I haven't done New York City Pagan Pride in a long time. But like, what brought you? Are you from? Where are you from? Aren't you from New York originally?
Yeah, I'm from Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Represent.
Yeah. I grew up in New York. I grew up out on Long Island, and then I moved.
Oh, sweet.
Where I am now, I'm up in New England because the pace is the same, but no one's trying to hit you with their car here, which is nice.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I hear that.
You know what I'm saying? Are you still in Brooklyn?
Yes. No. I moved to New Orleans at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Just because, my temple is here, my priestess is here. I run my own temple as well, but like she's here, she's 79. I saw her yesterday. So, and basically I wanted to be here. I was here 5 or 6 times a year. I could never afford a house in New York City. Now I have a house. I have a B&B attached to my house that I rent out. I have a
So we know where we're coming. We know where we're coming for Mardi Gras next year is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna write that down. I'm making a note of that. We're staying. Is a witchy B&B in New Orleans?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a make a star next to that. That's writing that down. How obviously you moved there to be with your temple, but you grew up in New York, right? So, at what point were you introduced to voodoo? Because a lot of your work is voodoo related, right? Voodoo related, but they're different. And I want you to explain to us what's the difference between voodoo and voodoo, because I really don't know.
Okay, sure. I guess I'll start with the difference. Whereas hoodoo's more of a folk tradition, sometimes it's related to conjure. I feel like a lot of people now have been sort of, delineating conjure as more of a non exclusively Black tradition, and hoodoo is an exclusively Black tradition. But I think
Hmm.
that's a modern distinction, because I think back in the day you got pretty much, especially here in New Orleans, you got people of all different races doing it. But hoodoo and conjure are definitely more of a folk tradition in the sense of, well, I talked to this old woman in the swamp and she said to do this if I had an unwanted neighbor, or my man was running around so I was supposed to put this in my underwear. Like it's very, use what you have, use what's around you. Not that we don't do that in the other African traditional religions, but they are more like voodoo or Santeria is more initiation based. It's based on,
Mm.
ceremonies that have to be done throughout the year for the different divinities or Orisha or Loa. So for me, that's really the bottom line difference between it, because, and then also where it comes from. If we're looking at hoodoo and conjure, we're talking about primarily the southern US. And if we're talking about Haitian Voodoo, obviously from Haiti,
Hmm.
with a heavy influence from Benin, that's where the original enslaved people, a lot of them came from and landed in Haiti. So that's why the practices in Benin are still called Vodou. The language is French, the language is Creole in Haiti. So you've got a lot more commonalities there. And then New
Wow.
Orleans Voodoo is a bit of a gumbo, to use my food analogies, where, we were a French colony and we were a Spanish colony and we were obviously now part of the United States of America. So
Right.
there was a huge indigenous population here. So there's much more of a blending, I think,
Hmm.
between all the practices in New
Hmm.
Orleans. So
Wow.
that's the short answer for that. And then how did I get into it? I mean, there
Yeah.
was a certain amount of hoodoo and conjure stuff that I just grew up doing. My Black family would tell me to do this, or I would just instinctively do this. And then my Sicilian family would have me do this, and my Scottish family would have me do this. So, like, the only reason I'm blending all of this stuff is because the people who taught it to me were all different,
Right.
nationalities, backgrounds, ethnicities, all of those things. And that's what I grew up with, like, this is how you make this dish, this is how you prepare your threshold in the morning, and but I always wanted to have more of a formalized education.
Mm.
And I started out in film school. I had to leave because I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, and I went back for anthropology because there was
That's
no film
awesome.
program where I was. So,
Right.
and all my anthro teachers were like, there's no such thing as witchcraft. There's no such thing as magic. It's all just, fishermen, leaving some coins before they go out to sea. And I was like, what kind of bald, misogynist shit is this? You're so wrong. And I'm going to write about this just to show you how
Yeah.
wrong you are, because I was
Yeah.
already a witch. I had my little witchlet tarot cards and all of that stuff. And
I love that you use the term witchlet because I use that all the time. I'm like,
oh,
oh,
yeah,
look at that little
definitely.
witchlet, it's so cute. But I love that you're talking about the blending of all of these different cultures and all of these different traditions. And yet we use a blanket term, witchcraft. We use a blanket
Yeah.
term, witch, right? And yet you mention, strega, you mention Santeria, you mention, your Celtic traditions, right?
Yeah.
So let's, what was it like growing up in New York with all of these influences? Was there one of these things that you gravitated to more than the others, or were you able to sort of cherry pick and go, I'm going to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, to create what worked for you? I think that's a really important point because I want people to know they don't have to choose one thing.
No, it's true. It's true. And I think my in my blending, I've always kept it very separate. which I
Mm.
think is a distinction that I make. And people are like, well, how do you do that?
Yeah, how
I
do
don't
you
have
do
some
that?
sort of goddess altar that's got, 15 different traditional things, because I wouldn't put 15 of my friends together in the same room and expect them to all eat the same thing or like the same color or, want to hear about the same crap that I feel like is important to talk to them about today. You have different friends, you
Yes.
have, different relatives you rely on for certain things. So that's pretty much how I constituted my practice. I mean, I think growing up, it really was just that's how I learned. You know what I mean? Like, oh, if you're having a rough time, let's use something like Florida water as an example. My Sicilian grandmother, whatever, grew up on the Lower East Side, had to find her husband right off the boat with no words of English.
Right.
She always had Florida water on her.
Yeah.
You look at Lucille Ball, being married to Desi, her last words were, "Bring me my Florida water." In
Right.
our tradition, we use it all the time.
Yeah.
Peruvians use Florida water, Cubans, like a lot of different cultures use this. So I knew, oh, okay, if I'm going to go on the subway or I'm going to have a rough day at school when I was a kid, I would grab the Florida water and put that on, and I knew I felt
Wow.
better. So I think in the beginning, it was less of what am I doing and where is it come from, as oh, I'm hungry, I'll eat this. Oh, I'm tired, I'll lie down. Oh, I'm going to do this difficult thing, I'll put the Florida water on. So it was almost second nature. And I feel like I grew up not even thinking that a lot of these things were magic until
Of
way
course.
later, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, they're just what you do. It's just how you go through life, and
Yeah.
it becomes part of your routine. And you're using, to paraphrase, you're using the right tool for the right job. Whether it is, I'm going to bring in, I'm going to work with this particular goddess or that particular energy or this particular talisman, regardless of where it comes from, as a magical practitioner, you have the freedom to say, okay, who and what energy is going to work for the issue that I have at hand, right? That's kind of what it sounds like that you're saying.
Yeah, that's certainly how I approached it, especially when I was younger, because that was just the info that was coming up to me, and I think it's important, especially now, I do want to mention this. I just found out I made Cosmo's Best of 22 witch books twice. I made it
Oh, that!
twice.
Congratulations.
I was like, what?
Which book is it? Tell everyone what has made the best.
Yeah, right. All right.
Cosmos
It's the Water Magic book.
Water
Yeah.
Magic, which is a
Yeah.
Llewellyn
And the
series.
Orishas book.
And the Orishas book.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I'm so
Amazing.
happy about
Congratulations.
that.
I've been saying for some time now that I need to get a button that does applause. So I can have have applause when you, right? But yes, that is what an accomplishment. What an accomplishment.
I stopped reading when I found the first one. I was like, yay. And then I was like, wait a minute, did I make the list twice? And then I finished reading. I was like, I was very excited, but I think I'm the only person who made the list twice. So,
That's unreal.
but
how does that
point,
feel? I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your point, and then I want to ask you a question about
No,
that.
I just wanted to say we didn't have these things. Cosmo was not doing Best Witch books when,
Yes.
1990. I mean, I'd already started my business in 91, and we had the first searchable database for magical herbs. We had I had one of the largest websites out there at the very beginning,
Right.
So I think so much of that was really trailblazing because a lot of this was hidden and kept in secret and things like that. So as much as I wanted to go out and have a more formalized study, I didn't really get the chance to do that until about when I joined my priestess from the Voodoo Spiritual Temple. And I believe that was 28 or 29 years ago.
Wow. And you're 100% right. Like, I grew up in the 90s and I found witchcraft in the late 90s, and you only had what was at the local shop. Like, find a really good local magic shop, a local pagan shop, and that was your resource. You couldn't really Instagram something, you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. But I just just bring it back really quick to your amazing accomplishment of being on the Cosmopolitan top 100, two of the top 100. There's two of the top 100 books.
Yeah. Top 55.
Top 50.
They didn't even make it to 100.
Come the fuck on. Come the fuck on. That's amazing. just as an aside, and we'll get back to all your journey and all of your craft and stuff, but how does that feel? How does that feel as a Black woman creating specifically the Orishas book, right? The water magic is a little bit more, I don't want to say mainstream, but it's more what people expect from what something cosmopolitan, for example, might cover. But the Orishas book, that's real, true culture and practice, and so respectful to those traditions. How does it feel for you to have that accomplishment, and specifically with a book of that nature?
No, I think it's amazing. I mean, I know it's a cliche, but I keep saying that this was the book I really wanted to write because so much of it is about presenting her story and this, connection to the divine feminine, how recognizing those forces in the universe, in ourselves, no matter what gender we are, really does allow for a sense of balance that was denied us by traditional education, by like this bald cocksucker guy I'm talking about. you know, and it meant so much to me. My daughter, her minor was in anthro. She actually went to Cornell for hotel restaurant management. She's a big foodie.
Wow.
So yeah. But one of her teachers at Cornell actually brought her my book and was like, "Is this your mom?" And for her to have that kind of experience where, wow, the truth was not being presented in academia. The truth was not being presented
Yes.
with the mainstream media. And now to have it something like out in Cosmo, or have it, I think we made an Oprah list the other day, have it really be in this, no, I know, have it be in this public forum is something that I fought so hard for, and it's still a little surprising to me, and it makes me a little nervous too. People are like, it's the famous Lilith Dorsey. I'm like, what? Like,
you're kind of a big deal. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, you're kind of a big deal. Let's just take that in. You're Lilith Dorsey, and you are kind of a big deal, and you deserve to be, because what you're doing is really, like you said, bringing truth. You're bringing truth, and you're bringing the reality of things into the world, and not just into the world in the way that unfortunately we as a magical community tend to be kind of insulated, right? Where it's within our own community, which is wonderful, but you are crossing those borders, crossing those barriers into what I call like the mainstream, the muggles, right? The non-witchcraft community, and creating space in there for people to learn and for people to understand. And I feel like that's, especially right now in our world, it's so important, because with that kind of a book, with the Orishas book, someone, Karen, soccer mom Karen can go and buy that book and learn and understand and go, oh, this isn't what I thought this was. It takes the stigma out of it. It takes the fear out of it, and creates understanding and conversation, which is how we find common ground. And I think that it's just fucking phenomenal that you have created something that is breaking down those barriers. Like, come on, congratulations. It's just fucking
thank you.
huge. It's huge. It's huge. So you had said this was the book that you always wanted to write, right? So what took so long? and how did it come to be when it came to be?
I was like, insert eye roll.
Right. Life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, first of all, when I started writing, I mean, I'm not a writer. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a dancer. An actress. I started out doing Broadway when I was
Broadway.
Yeah. I started out doing Broadway. So, like, for me to be this, like, writing books person, I'm an Aries, so I was just like, I'm not writing anything until I have a contract, and like, which is not the way it's done. You know what I mean? You got to write a pitch, you got to write a treatment, you got to do a market analysis, all of this, So yes. If I didn't have friends who were already writing books and sort of putting themselves out there, like, Lilith's book needs to be out there. You need to take a look at this. You need to sign her. You need to do this, you
Right.
know. And I, you know, so that was the first one, but still that one went out of print right away. It was just reprinted last year, thank goddess.
That was
People were
the
charging
voodoo.
$900 for it.
I mean, hey,
Like,
that was the voodoo and African traditional religion, right?
yeah,
That's the one
that's
that you're talking
it.
about.
The
It just
title
got
changed
reprinted.
when it got reprinted, but yes, yes. And I used to tell people for, you know, for $900, I will put on a bikini and read it to you. Like, well, I don't get any of that money, but
Yes,
I'll
yes,
coin,
yes,
coin, you know,
yes, 100%.
whatever.
Yes.
That's where we're at with that, you know. So that went out of print, and then when I signed with Wiser, they really wanted me to do the book on love magic, which for me was an ethical take on love magic. But as we say here in New Orleans, ain't nobody trying to hear that. So like
Right,
that
right.
didn't sell as well as I had hoped. And then when I went back and I was like, all right, I'll do another one, but only under these circumstances if you
Right.
let me write this thing that I really want to write. And that's how it came about. So, and I think it
Wow.
really is empowering. I mean, that to me, yes, I'm so happy it made the Cosmo list, and I hope it will, you know, mean more sales for me and all of that. But people write me and they tell me, like, if I'd had a book like this when I was a teenager, it would have saved my life. It would have saved, you know, me having all these negative thoughts about, you know,
Yes,
femininity and, you know, the goddess and all of that. And I'm
yes,
like, well, that's what I was trying to do. You know what I
right.
mean? It's debilitating. It's debilitating to be a woman. It's debilitating to be non-binary. It's debilitating to be a BIPOC. All of these things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So to just
Mm-hmm.
have something else that people can open up and look at and say, wait a minute, I do come from this line of great queens. I do come from this insane royal lineage that nobody ever told me about.
Right, right. I mean, because you're getting into history and lore and legend as well as magic and the roots of that. And I think understanding the roots um, really is transformative, you know. And again, I just have to congratulate you on that. And I wonder, like, what's the next? How will you expand upon this?
I don't know. I've been thinking about a lot of things. For a moment, I was even considering, like, when people go, "What's your next book?" I'm going to go, "I'm writing a book to take out people who ask me what my next
Well,
book
his
is."
book is
You know?
right, right, right. Exactly. Well, that's it. Because now everybody's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. We want more." And you're like, "Can I just have a second to like be in this moment and deal?" You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I've published 3 books since the pandemic, so
Right.
that's like insane to me to have done that. And you know, I'm still working on some film projects and things like that. And what I'm really excited about, you know, back to, you know, we're not doing magic in a vacuum. We live on a planet, there's
That's
a
right.
community. The city of New Orleans has allowed me to set up a community garden across the street from my house. So
Wow.
I'm dedicating it to all the indigenous people who've been here. We're going to fill it with traditional Choctaw and Chickasaw plants. I'm going to be out there. All the stuff has to be given away for free. So all the herbs and fruits and vegetables we grow are going to be given away for free still. But it's, you
Oh
know,
my
hot here
goodness.
and I'm one little woman. So, I mean, I think my summer's probably going to be spent doing more digging and
Wow. But
gardening
that
than
is that's the work. You
it
know, like
is.
you can learn all you want to learn, you can write all you want to write, you could do that, internal solitary magic, you can go to ritual, you could do this, you could do that, but it's not until you take that work and bring it into the world that you really affect change. And that's what it sounds like you're doing, is that you're taking your practices and your belief into the community and affecting change.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not even just from a historical or a magical standpoint, you know, from an ecological standpoint. This is a
Right.
poor black neighborhood. It floods a lot. It's a food desert. We can go to, you know, the dollar store and get a head of iceberg lettuce. That's the extent of what you can get in like a 2-mile radius. And people think, what, in the city of New Orleans? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we have here, because it's just not set up for these lower income communities to
Right,
really be able to have the healthy things that they need and to take
right,
it back to the land.
right, right, right.
And that makes me sad. And even if it's just, one kid walks by and gets a cherry tomato, it makes me happy. Like,
Right. And it should. I mean, I visited New Orleans on a business trip a bunch of years ago. And, I was in my hotel and in a convention center most of the time, right? My first time and last time, it was my first and only time ever in New Orleans. And of course, I had a few hours free, and some, coworkers wanted to, like, oh, let's go see the city, see the city. We
yeah,
went to the French Quarter and got a coffee at the famous bakery,
Cafe du Monde.
Cafe Du Monde, right? I'm gluten-free, so there was nothing really for me. Anyway, I had a coffee, and that's what we did. Do you know what I mean? Like that. I will say this: it was one of the worst cities I've ever been in for gluten-free stuff. Um,
It's not
to be
great.
to be fair, not great. I was like, oh, I'll have this dish. No, there's flour in it. But in any case, the thing that did strike me was the amount of poverty that is there, and how people seem to ignore it. And I was like, it's not right. It's just not right. And that there's still so much damage left over from hurricanes. And so you are in a position where you can actually help this community, and you might be one lone witch there doing it, but that's how it starts. You
Yeah.
are the start of those ripples. And it's people are going to hear this, and they're going to be like, she's starting a garden, let's go help. You know what I mean? Like, that's fantastic. And
I
again,
hope
that's
so.
bringing your magical, like, that's not just doing magic home alone or in your
No.
backyard. That, especially when you're talking about gardens and food and feeding people, because all of that intention that you're putting into that gardening and food, and then you're putting that energy in, and then people are physically taking that energy in through the food. It's really inspirational. It's really inspirational.
Yeah, yeah. I
You should feel
mean,
so good about that.
I do. I do. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody listening to this. I had adopted a foster dog not that long ago, and she was very old, and she was blind, and she was deaf. And, most people were like, yay, thumbs up, and I was like, well, I would not want somebody to put me down if I was blind and deaf.
Right?
She still likes her food. She still likes naps,
It's
you
still
know.
feisty. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I like food. I like naps. And then someone on my social media is like, you're just doing this like those rich celebrities to show how good you are. And I'm just like, lady, like, no, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. I'm doing it because I love gardening. I'm doing it because I think it's important.
Right.
I spend a lot of time with younger kids. I was a nanny for a long time, and, just showing them that, yeah, we can plant, literally, we can plant a seed and it can grow into something like a beautiful flower or a tomato for us to eat. And the first time they really realize that and see it, that's something invaluable to me, and I would do it even if I didn't put it on social media. I would do it even
Right.
if I didn't talk to you about it in
Right.
an interview.
Right.
It's just who I am. And
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Do you feel often, I feel this way, and I'm wondering if you do, that because we are public witches, there is a responsibility. I that there is a responsibility to say, I'm not right. Like, you say, oh, I'm going to do this good thing, and then people immediately are like, well, you don't really mean it. You're just doing it for the publicity and
Yep.
the lights and I'm like, if that's what you think, that's your fucking problem. Like, maybe you're just not a good person, but the goal is, I'm going to do this good thing, and maybe you'll be like, that's a great idea, I'm going to do the good thing too. I
Yes.
feel like we have a responsibility to give into our communities, and to be there and to inspire, where we can, not just to other people, but to also show, like, hi, I'm a witch and I'm not scary. you know what I mean? you
Yeah,
know
yeah. I mean, I had a lot of trauma in my life, and I think it goes
Sure.
both ways. I mean, I think that for a long time I didn't want to talk about it, and stuff like that. And I was like, no, wait a minute. You know what I mean? If I'm doing a reading for somebody or something and they're talking about, oh, I had this bad situation. And I'm not trying to one up somebody, but if I can say I've been in this situation that was similar and knowing my life most likely worse, and I'm still getting up in the morning, I'm still trying to make a difference, I'm still trying to help people who are around me in any way that I can, and, take care of myself and take care of the planet in the process. So I think that, yeah, we do have a responsibility on both sides of it to just sort of, yes, we're witches, but we're also human beings, and each choice that we make during the day makes a difference. My godmother who passed, Oshun-African, she used to say, go and do the next right thing. You know what I mean? Next
I
right
love
action.
that.
What is that? You know what I mean? So maybe I can't think about my whole life, or maybe I can't think about saving the neighborhood or the planet, but what's the next right thing for me to do in this
Mm,
moment that needs to
mhm.
get done, and just take it from there. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be something small. And all those
Right.
tiny small things, tied together will turn into a bigger thing eventually.
I love that so much. And I really want to thank you for bringing up, trauma and being able to share trauma with others. Because especially as witches, I feel like we need to address our traumas and we need to heal ourselves. And a lot of times that happens when we are teaching or writing or reading or dealing with other people and be like, oh, I have to deal with this thing because it's coming up because of this other person. So if I don't deal with it, I can't help this person. Right. Did you
Yeah,
find any
definitely.
of that kind of stuff happening while you're in your writings? Things coming
Oh,
up
yeah.
for you?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I think that it informs my life, so it certainly informs the writing. And just talking about how to navigate these things effectively, like I was talking about my love magic book, in there it
Mhm.
goes, if you're being abused, call the authorities. You
Yes.
know what I mean? And then there's these other things you can also do in the situation to help
Right.
yourself.
Right.
But I think that that has to work hand in hand, and we have to be responsible, and it makes it, I don't know. I personally would listen to somebody who said, oh, yeah, okay, you're just giving me advice about what to do if you're in the situation and you grew up in a situation like this, and then you encountered it over here with this other person. And, this
Hmm.
is something that I think a lot of, younger witches too, like, oh, I've done this spell once and it works. I'm like, no, we need to do the spell in the North Hemisphere, the South Hemisphere. We need to do it with men, women, children, old people, trans
Hmm.
people. We need to see if the spell works under as many conditions as possible, and then we can recommend it to somebody else. It's not just, oh, well, I like basil and I like rose, and let me throw this together because
Right.
it makes me happy. You don't know what
Right.
that's going to do. You
Right.
know?
Right. You don't know what that's going to do, and you don't know what that's going to do for someone else who has different energy than you, who has different intentions than you. And
Yes.
unless you're going to preface it with, and sometimes I do, I'll preface something with like, this worked for me. I can't say
Right.
that it's going to work for you, but you're welcome to try it. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
only speak from my own experiences, so I try not to be like, this is the only way, or this is what you have to do. It's this is the only this is what worked for me. I think
Right.
that's a really important point. I'm curious, Lilith, as we're talking about this, in writing the Orishas book, was there anything you learned in that process um, about the subject matter or yourself that surprised you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I talk about in there how I'm a daughter of Oshun, which was a surprise to begin with, just because I've had a lot of death in the family. So some people were thinking it was more of a Oya vibe, that kind of mistress of the night kind of thing, but whatever. So that was a surprise to me, just in general, being, sort of, having divination done, and that showing up that I was a daughter of Oshun, which makes sense now in the looking back on it. Like I said, I'm a dancer, I'm a performer, all of these things. And that makes sense. But the writing, I really wanted to expand upon it to, we were talking before about how, 30 years ago, we didn't have the resources. So being able to expand upon this and talk about, the musical group Ibiyi, to talk about the musical group Oshun, to talk about like some of these younger folks who've come out and embraced the religion and used it in their music or used it in their art or something, which I really don't think was possible, certainly not to the extent that it is today. So that has made me very excited, just sort of seeing what these things are and sort of seeing where it's going to take off and where it's going to go and seeing it in a beautiful context, because I think that's in a lot of ways how we make meaning. Sure, somebody can open a book and read it and have this sort of analytical academic moment about it. But if I go and, when I was dancing for Dr. John, I performed at Bonnaroo. It's a very different thing to do a dance ritual on stage in front of 10,000 plus people. Yes. That, I don't know, they're probably, in varying stages of enlightenment. Let's just leave it there.
Right.
That's the nice way of saying,
yes.
Who knows what
everybody's
doing in the parking lot. Yeah. But to be able to do that for me is also just so amazing, and to be able to have those experiences. And, I dedicated that book to Dr. John Mack, and he was like a dad to me, so just being able to have that out there, he told me once, he was like, the dancing is good, but the books are the thing. So I guess he brought it back home for me,
wow.
He knew that it was going to last. He knew that it was going to be there long after him and me and, everybody. And that was just so beautiful.
Oh, wow. That's so lovely that you had that bond with him and that he really, someone like that believing in you so wholeheartedly can really make the difference as to which way you go or what risks you take, right? That's a really great segue, because I wanted to talk about your life as a performer and as a dancer, and I wanted to know, like, what role, if any, did music and dance have in your witchcraft leading up to, your life growing up through now, and vice versa? What role does witchcraft have in dance and performance for you?
I mean, I think in the best case scenario that, music and dance is a ritual and witchcraft is a performance. I mean, even if you're just doing something in a performing type way for whatever ancestors might be there, whatever, Orisha or Loa or spirits or gods and goddesses that might happen to pop in. So you're on a performance in the sense you're on your best behavior. You know what I mean? You're not picking your nose or your ass or something else like, would you do that? Like, no, you wouldn't.
No, but you're moving and acting with intention.
Yes.
Right. Because anything you do, anything can be considered ritual if done with intention. Right. I feel like there's somewhere I read a definition of what is a ritual. Right. And the definition was this broad strokes of anything done with intentionality can be considered ritual. And if you're dancing or you're performing, especially something where you practice steps and you're thinking mindfully about it and it's maybe in dedication to, that can be ritual, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's a fuzzy line, honestly. And I think for me, I grew up in, singing those, my parents sent me to Lutheran school. So I grew up singing those, hymns and, it's going to be a floody, but I could see the power of having everybody singing in unison. Maybe I didn't give a crap about, Noah and the floody, but I could see that it would get people excited. I could see that people jumping up out of their chair and clapping and moving along could get people excited, even if it was about something that was not that exciting to begin with. And then it was also a really good tool to remember. So for my rituals, we almost always use song. A lot of times I will rewrite, either traditional standards, or I will use a piece of something traditional in there to sort of blend so people can, you know, so much of their religion was lost or, you know, kept secret or underground. So much of this knowledge was not allowed to be out there, but people made do with what they had. So, you know, if I can have something where it's got a rhythm that's the same to someone, or it's got the same feeling, you know, we just did a
Right.
huge, my priestess just did a huge ceremony in Congo Square, which is where Marie Laveau and all the enslaved people used to have their dances in the market and things like that. And we did it for St. John's Eve a couple of weeks ago. And at the end, we sang, and it was beautiful because we sang Mardi Gras Indian standards. So even though it was me and my four God kids singing who knew what we were singing, everybody else could join in on the refrain. They could
Right.
pick it up really easily. They could dance around with us with it. And it
Right.
just made such a beautiful moment to
Yeah.
close the honoring in that space where people have been doing that for hundreds of years, you know.
Absolutely. And I feel like song and dance is something that, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. This is something that a lot of European traditions have lost. You know, if you go to, and I'm going to use blanket generalizations here, is not in any way to offend anyone, just from my own knowledge, right? If you go to a Catholic mass, which is the way I grew up, everybody's like, and Lord, we pray to thee. And nobody's joyful and nobody's happy. And is this weight, like that's the music, right? If you go to a Baptist church, everybody's dancing and clapping and having a great
Yep.
time, and they're singing and they're joyful. And when we think about song and dance within the realm of spirituality or religious celebrations or ritual celebrations, we have to remember that this is vibrational energy that we are raising, right? We are coming together and creating vibrational energy. And you, as the group, you can raise that energy or not. And right. And that in
Oh, yeah.
itself makes a huge difference, right? I mean,
Yeah.
from what you're describing, this gathering on the square, it sounds like it was amazing, where you were
It
all
was, it
singing.
was. I mean, it was over 100 degrees, but we still got 150 people out there. We
Wow.
still got everybody dancing, and everybody got fed, and nobody passed out. It was great.
Bonus. No one passes out of heat
That's the,
stroke.
hey, I consider that a
Bonus.
win. Nobody
I
went on fire, you know, like, it's great. It's
that's
great.
excellent. That's excellent. And you've brought this, you've kind of like merged your worlds, the performance aspect and then the spiritual aspect of bringing that together. And I'm just going to diverge a little bit because you mentioned earlier that you started on Broadway, and I'm a Broadway freak. I've never been on Broadway, obviously, but I love Broadway. I love show tunes. I'm a theater kid in my heart and soul, and always will be. And being in theater and being in any sort of a company where there is music, dancing, and joy, it's the difference between watching something on a television or watching live theater, right? Again, getting into vibrational energy.
Right.
And so I love how you've really brought all of your worlds together to create what you have on your own spiritual journey. And thank you for sharing it with the rest of us, because it's freaking awesome. I would like to take a break to hear from our amazing sponsors, and we will be right back with Lilith Dorsey, who I'm kind of in love with. Okay, we'll be right back. And we don't actually take a break. Would you like to take a break? Do you need to like let the dog out or go to the bathroom or anything?
I could use like a 2-3 minute break if that's cool.
You got it. No problem. I will
More
pause.
coffee. All right.
Yes, coffee. Welcome back. We are back with the incredible Lilith Dorsey. I believe we are now extra caffeinated after the break.
Yes.
Yes, a little extra coffee. I've only had one today, and I'm going to need at least 47 more. That's the truth. Okay, so here's a question for you. Back to the topic at hand. So we've talked about so many things, but so this book specifically, the Orishas, Goddesses, and Voodoo Queens, is there in this book or surrounding this book, are there any misconceptions that you would like to debunk?
I think first thing is that, and you kind of touched on it before, but I've got a lot of people that are like, this isn't my tradition. I'm Karen. Can I read this book? And I was like, I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't want you to read it. I spent so much time learning European history and all this colonizer history. So I feel like people owe it to themselves to get the other side of things out there, at least to just start to balance it out. So that's the first thing. Like, I wouldn't write a book if I didn't want people to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to make, because there are a lot of, and I will speak for myself, those of us that are Caucasian, that are, of European descent, that might go, this book looks interesting, but it's not for me. I'm not allowed to read this, or I shouldn't read this because it's about something that isn't my culture and that maybe it's not for me. So like, I appreciate you saying that, because it should be for everyone so we can all learn, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, and I always draw that cultural appropriation line. I was writing something about Jay Allen Cross's book the other day, and he's like, well, we can't turn around and start selling it. We can't turn around and start taking over those spaces. You know what I mean? So I think that,
Yes.
and anybody can understand that coming from a culture. We're talking about being part of Sicilian culture. You know what I mean? If there's somebody who's not Sicilian selling a Sicilian cookbook, we're all going to be like,
we're gonna be like, those aren't meatballs. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
right?
like, and so I think that for me is where I draw the line. It's one thing to read the book. It's one thing to, maybe get a candle just for honoring, as opposed to being like, I'm going to call these Orisha down and tell them what to do, because that's not how it works. But in a respectful way, I think that, like I just said, my great grandmother would light a St. Anthony candle or an Elegua candle. If that's what your grandmother did, go ahead, put it on there and light it,
Right.
And I talk about things you can do if you're not initiated. But if you want to move forward, I talk about the proper way of doing that, because unfortunately, a lot of this access to information has meant that the teachers were never that high of a bar, but now I feel like we're in the sub basement and it's flooded and there's feces floating around. So
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
A lot of the people that are out there just becoming famous on social media and getting book contracts and stuff like that, we've seen already how they're not genuine. We've seen already how they're not necessarily good people. We've seen, if we talk about hoodoo, some of the top popular hoodoo authors I'm looking at, they're not Black people. They're not people who have a tenth of the education that I have. I'm not saying that makes me better, but I'm saying I spent a really long time in school. I spent more than half my life learning about this stuff and trying to make a difference, and learning how to learn about this stuff in order to present it to people, and then initiation of it.
That is so important, what you just said. Learning how to learn about these things, right? Because there are certain methods of learning that are legit, and certain that are not. And I recently had a conversation with Jay Allen Cross, and he said the exact same thing about appropriation to me, because I'm having the same conversation with you as I had with him. Like, I don't know anything about this type of magical working, and I wouldn't assume to, and I've never learned about it because I felt this is not a space for me, and that I should not be in that space. And so what he said, exactly what you just said, was that if you're wondering about appropriation, it's really about, are you profiting from this? Are you taking up a space in the world where someone who is of that culture could be? So if you are, trying to teach hoodoo, and, you're like you said, like a Karen, and I'm putting that in parentheses for those of you who are, I mean, hopefully there's not a lot of people named Karen listening and they're offended, and then they're offended. Please don't write to me. But he said exactly that. Like, if you're doing this and you're like, oh, this spell or this goddess really calls to me, and you want to have that in your home, in your own house, in your own solitary practice, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you go out into the world and you're like, I know everything about this, and you're not initiated, and you're taking up that space, and you're saying you're an expert, that's where we get into that uncomfortable space. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I even had a good friend of mine who, was having an issue with, again, a person in their home that they didn't want. I think it was their step monster or something like that. And I was like, oh, here's what you do. Da, 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 da. And then turned around the next day and that spell was in their shop. And I was like, no, that's not okay. Like, I did
Oh,
not give you the permission to do that. Like, if you wanted to talk about that, maybe we could develop a line together in your shop and I could get some money from it.
wow.
That's a possibility, but not asking and just taking. I think that's where this slippery slope of colonialism and all the rest of it has just left us here,
Wow,
you
that
know.
just feels icky, right? Like that just feel like when you said that, it actually made me feel like, oh, who would do that? Like that's just icky. Like it just makes you like
No,
no,
and I know they just weren't thinking, it wasn't done out of maliciousness, but like I always tell everybody, like if you run over my foot with your car, like you could be sorry and you didn't mean to do it, but my foot's still really messed up. Like that's,
right,
like we have to be mindful of these things. We have to
right.
think about it in order to move forward respectfully together, like I was just saying, everybody wants respect for their own things and their own culture, but they need to bring that to the table. You know what I mean? Like, what are you sharing? What are you buying? What are you really doing the actual work to see if what you're getting is coming from genuine people who know what they're talking about? Because otherwise, you're just playing, and you might as well just, throw your money in the toilet, like those bad scammer
Yes.
spells, you know.
Yes.
Wrap
And
it up, throw it off a bridge.
and it's the same thing where we're talking about kind of two sides of the double-edged sword, where at the beginning of this conversation we were talking about how when we were coming into witchcraft there really wasn't, you didn't have the internet in the way you have it today where you could Google and find this information and do all that, and today there's too much information and not
Yes.
all of it is good, and you have to kind of vet those sources if you want to learn about things that are outside of your own culture or your own practices, or the things that maybe you were brought up in, right? You have to vet those sources to make sure that this person teaching you or this person who's giving you the information really knows what they're talking about and that they've been through that process. It is a slippery slope. I think it is a slippery slope. And I would imagine that you get asked a lot of questions about appropriation with what you are, especially now with this book on the bestseller, the Cosmo 100 and all of that, like being so mainstream, someone's going to have a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that there were less problems than I thought, honestly, because I'm
Yes,
just so used
awesome.
to getting a bunch of crap
Right,
all the time.
right.
And where was I? Oh, I was at Paginnicon in Minneapolis a couple of months ago, and there was an old black Babalawo priest in the back of the room, and somebody was raising their hand. Well, I had a dream about this Orisha, and I'm going to set it up in the store, and I'm going to set it up in my house. And I was like, that's not how this is done. We're talking about a practice that has, a certain list of rules that have been the same for, I think, if we look at the Orisha Shango, goes back to 4th century BCE. So,
Wow.
2,500 years, the practice has been the same. You can't decide to do something because you just had a dream about it. Like, that's really nice. And I'm not trying to say, yay, you had a dream. But, and the black ball was in the back. He's like, what did she just say? And I was like, I said, don't do it. Don't put Aliquot in the door. He's like, okay, and then we like kind of fell asleep again. It was great. So I was
Right,
like,
right. And it's possible that she really did have this dream and this Orisha really
sure,
came to
of
her and that
course.
spirit came to her and was like, you need to work with this energy. Great. That doesn't mean commercialize, put it in your shop, make money off of it. It means maybe sit with that energy, maybe journal about it, maybe do some work at home with this particular energy. It doesn't mean tell the world that you know everything about this Orisha.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And I usually, somebody called me with this problem a week ago, and I said, well, go get a reading, because in all the ATRs, if something comes to you before you're initiated, we don't know what the fuck that is. It's like you've left your door open, and I'm not trying, you want to leave your door open, that's fine. But
Right.
it's a dangerous neighborhood, and anyone could walk in there, and maybe they could be wearing red and black, and they could have a cane, and they could say their name was Eloqua because it makes them easier to get through the door that way. But you don't know. And it happened to me. It's a humbling experience, you know, like I was so used to dealing with spirits and magic and all of this. And I would go before I was initiated and think I was getting possessed or think something was talking to me. And they would drag me out of there, kicking and screaming, and not let me come back in because they don't
Wow.
know what's in there. You need to have those initiations to get cleansed off. So the Orisha and the Loa can recognize you and you can recognize them. So you can tell the
Right.
difference between I left my door open and my good friend walked in, and I left the door open and the homeless motherfucker next door who's a crackhead walked in.
Wow, what a great point. Because without the education and the guidance, you don't even know what you're looking at, right?
No, you
So
don't.
you could come and be like, spirit spoke to me and it looked like this, because you get that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Spirit spoke to me and
yeah,
it looked
yeah,
like
all the
this.
time.
And so I know that it was this thing. And you're like, bitch, please. That is not how it happened. And you haven't done the work to recognize it. You don't have an elder or a community to go to discuss what's going on with you and to decipher the language of spirit in this particular way.
No, you don't.
So important, Lilith. Wow, what a
No,
great
and it
point.
is the mark of being young, you know, like I'm going to give you another food analogy, but I always, it reminds me of when you're with a toddler and they're making mud pies and they make this thing and they're like, yum, eat this pizza. And you're like, yum, yum, sweetheart, but you can't really eat it because it's toxic and they can't really
Right,
eat it either. So,
right, right,
like,
right, right.
it
It's
might
make
look
believe.
like it. It
Right,
might smell like it. That little kid might even, I've had a couple of kids that tried to eat it. No, no,
right,
that's an
right.
acorn and a twig, you know. Don't
speaking
put
of
that in your
speaking
mouth.
of food, we're running out of time, but I do want to touch on your African-American Ritual Cookbook, because I'm a kitchen witch and obviously food is my practice, food is my life. And that's really rough because this particular day that we're recording this, I've actually decided to cleanse. So I cannot eat food for the next 48 hours. But let's talk all about this cookbook of yours. Just really quick before we wrap up, I really want to know like what brought that into being, and like are these your family recipes? Are these recipes you collected? And just tell me everything about it in like a paragraph.
Okay. It's a combination of family recipes, traditional recipes, recipes that people have shared, recipes that I've, sort of developed over the years. We've been doing open feasts here for my spiritual house. It's called House of
Mm,
Mama Brigitte. So we've been having feasts here for at least 15 years. Where people come and different priests and priestesses and all of that, and we, lay out the offering table and the ritual foods have to go on it. So I just wanted to give people a way to access some of those things without necessarily, maybe you don't have a spiritual house down the street.
mm,
And as I just said, I had to travel over 1,000 miles to get to my spiritual house. We got to do what we got to do. But maybe you want to
right.
do something nice for the Orisha and you make a dish and you leave it in their sacred place. And that I thought was a good thing, just so people could understand it. And so much of it is
Excellent.
really different, like if we're talking about Brazilian cooking and red
Mm.
palm oil, like even the ingredients aren't the same. So I wanted to put that out there as well.
Did you make every recipe in that book?
I think all but
Yes.
maybe one, because I'm not a
Yeah.
big seafood eater. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it may be when I finally get the rest of my Oshun initiations, there's a lot of them that she can't eat shellfish. So
Mm.
I think that might be a thing. It's just like my natural, I don't really like that kind of stuff. So if there's a fish in there, I probably made it and served it to other people and
Yes.
asked them how they liked it. But
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, food, and I taught a class yesterday for Witchfest, and we're really talking about how um, kitchen witchery is so prevalent in every single culture on the planet. What we recognize as kitchen magic or food magic can be found at the beginning of time in every culture on every continent. uh, is this idea of people coming around food, connecting over food, and how it fosters community, how it fosters healthy relationships, and how it keeps you connected to your ancestors and to the earth. You know, I always say, if you really want to know a people, find out what they eat, right?
Yes.
Like find
Yes.
out what is their native food, what are their native top 5 native dishes. Like every, you know, a Sicilian grandmother makes these 3 things, you know,
Yes.
you know, every Caribbean grandmother makes these 3 things, you know, what are those things? And you'll understand the people and how they eat, what they eat, and why they eat, right? So I mean, is there a lot of that in this book of understanding culture through food?
Oh, definitely, definitely. It explains why we're eating it and why it ends up being that way and how it found its way into the culture, you know. There really is a ton of anthropology in it. I mean, it's a short book, you know, people can get it, it's an ebook, but I do want to expand it sometime. I mean, I did also do a whole tarot and food series that was really exciting, where I did recipes for each of the major arcana. That was a lot of fun.
That is spectacular. I'm not going to say no spoilers, but I'm not going to say that certain kitchen witches might be working on something on a similar project at the moment. Just saying, but it's a very cool project and it's a very cool thing because we all eat, right? And food is so prevalent. And it's funny because I was just last week, I visited a friend and it was her grandmother's like 80th birthday or 89th birthday, something crazy. And this whole side of her family is West Indian. And she was like, you got to come to the party and meet my West Indian family. And I was like, hell yes. And I was like, is there going to be food there? And she's like, oh yeah, we're doing all West Indian food. And I've never tried oxtail. And I was like,
wow.
I have always wanted to try oxtail. And there was jerk chicken. And there was like this orzo dish, which I couldn't try because I have a gluten allergy. But
yeah.
But just to see a family that and experience their culture through their food and see, though the food might taste different, how the culture is exactly the same as my Italian family, right? The reverence for the elder is exactly the same as the Italian family. The way they feel about the food, the way they're passionate about the food, how they could break down every ingredient, like the magic behind it is something that we all share, I think. And it was just awesome. And I'm sorry for going on that tangent, but I'm totally going to buy this book because I didn't even know. I'm gonna be like super honest. I'm like the worst host in the world. I didn't know you had a cookbook, and so now I'm gonna have to go buy it, and hopefully I don't butcher all of your fabulous, fantastic recipes. I'm excited. Okay, so Lilith Dorsey, you are amazing. I am so grateful that you came on the show and spent some time with us today. This has been educational and enlightening and empowering and wonderful. Lilith, tell everyone who's listening where they can find your books, how they can contact you, where they can follow you online.
All right. They can find me on social media, Facebook. I have an author page, Insta, Twitter. I'm even still on there. My website is lilithdorsey.com. People can go there if they want to book a reading. The blog is Voodoo Universe. You can just Google Voodoo Universe. It's the largest voodoo blog in the world. There's plenty of recipes on there, plenty of everything that I've been talking about today. And YouTube channel, all of that. I got all the things.
So just Google Lilith Dorsey and everything is Lilith Dorsey, and she's amazing, and you'll find her easy peasy. And we'll put all of your links up on the show notes so people will be able to find you.
Oh, great.
So that will be easy peasy. Okay, so last question, and it is the question that I ask everyone at the end of the show. Obviously, I'm a kitchen witch. Obviously, I love food. If you were to have me cook you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
Okay, now I'm going to answer this quickly. I would have you make me my yamaya rice because it's gluten-free, and I want you to eat it too.
You want me to eat it? Yeah.
I think it's very calming. It's something that is, it's rice, right? Like, and I remember doing a cooking class once, and somebody got it wrong. She was standing there poking at it for 45 minutes, and I was like, does she have some weird new way to make rice that I don't know? So, but perfect rice is an art. So that's what I would have you make, and it would be something that was very relaxing, very calming, very peaceful for the two of us to share together.
That sounds wonderful. You said Mayamia rice?
Yamaya rice.
Yamia.
Yes, it's in the cookbook. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of you would have me make one of your recipes, which is really interesting. Usually people are asking me to make stuff that I would normally make, but I love that you'd want me to interpret one of
Yes.
your recipes.
Yes.
And you're right, rice is an art, and it's also prosperity food. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like if you
Yeah.
were to when you sit down with someone over a rice-based dish, you really can tap into a lot of prosperity energy, especially if there's
Yes.
beans in there and veggies in there. And now I'm hungry. See,
Yes.
I told you I'm cleansing today and I'm starving.
I know.
It is okay. It's what has to be done every once in a while. Lilith Dorsey, you are amazing. I cannot thank you enough for
Oh,
spending time with
thank
me
you.
today. You are just such a delight. Thank you for being here. Everyone, go learn all about Lilith and buy her books and buy her cookbook and follow her online. And she's just a ray of sunshine, obviously, as you can see if you're watching this video, or if you're listening, you could hear it. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, everyone, I wish you so many blessings and so much gratitude. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.